So hello to everybody. I think I see 11 people here so far. Plenty of names, familiar names. So it's great to see you all again. Some that I don't know, so welcome. We will just give it. This is the Indigenous Defense Research Association. You can probably see me on your screen now, but Isaac Merkle will be up very shortly. His PowerPoint is there. He's much better looking, and he is the reason that you're here because he has actually something to contribute. But I am just keeping the time and waiting for everybody to join. I wonder if maybe I'll turn off the beeps just in case anybody comes in. Do you like the beeps, Isaac? Do you like to know if people are coming and going?
No, it's a bit distracting.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's that off.
And do you know offhand if I can advance the slides with my keyboard or must I use the mouse click?
In my experience, you should be able to use the arrow keys as well, but feel free to go ahead and.
That doesn't seem to work. So I have to stick with the mouse.
So we're at 12:02. I'll just say my little bit, and then it'll be 12:04, and Isaac can get going, and everybody will be here who wants to be here. Welcome. This is the Indigenous Defense Research Association's monthly webinar. I'm Andy Davis. I know a lot of you, so welcome again. But for those of you who have never been to one of these before, I know that word about this webinar did spread far and wide, and I got some enthusiastic folks who were asking how to join, whom I'd never met before. So we're the Indigenous Defense Research Association is simply an online virtual collective of people who have interest in data and research as it relates to Indian defense. We cover not only professional researchers and professors, but also people who work in defender offices, managers, IT professionals, people like me who are government researchers. As I said, anybody who has an interest in the intersection of data research and defense for any reason. All are welcome. Please do spread the word about the association and get in touch if you want to join our listserv. We have these monthly webinars as a way for members of the community to share anything that they want to share. Often people present new projects that they're working on or just ruminations about anything that's likely to be of interest to others. And today is no exception. Isaac is here to talk about the selection of case management systems. If anybody else has any ideas for anything you would like to take an hour on the first Friday of the month to discuss, please do get in touch. This is a venue and a forum that is open to anybody for any use. But with that, I will hand it over to Isaac. Thank you very much.
Good day, friends, and thank you for tuning in, I suppose. My name is Isaac Merkle. I am the IT director here at the Knox County Public Defender's Office in Knoxville, Tennessee. I have been working in technology and indigent defense for the better part of a quarter century, shockingly. And case management has sort of emerged as my special focus, I suppose. I know, of course, attorneys and managers have a tremendous amount of knowledge about what they need and expect from case management. I do not pretend to represent those considerations, but I feel like they'll be represented in your organization anyway. A lot of groups do not have on-staff technicians, to my lament, and so what I want to give you is just sort of a nerd's eye view of this, maybe just some things that you haven't thought about or wouldn't occur to you otherwise. And first of all, I just want to talk a minute about the issue of the cloud because it's so fundamental now to case management. Certainly, I can recall when this was a new idea for most managers and a little shocking for most nerds, and now we've transitioned to the point where it's almost the de facto standard. It's interesting to me that I semi-often will hear people enthuse about the cloud and then subsequently sort of quietly inquire what exactly it means even. It is an obscure thing. That's how it's marketed, as being very oblique. All it really means is that the server or servers that house your data that run your application are not on site. They're being run by someone else remotely, and you're connecting to them across the internet. The benefits of the cloud are numerous to small and underfunded agencies such as we tend to be. Most notably, you can save a lot of money because you don't have to pay for your own nerd, and you don't have to maintain your own servers on site and worry about things like backup and batteries and all these sorts of things. There are possibly some reasons why you should consider otherwise, though. The alternative to a cloud-hosted solution would, of course, be local hosting, where you do have things literally physically on site in your building. That does cost more money. You don't necessarily have to have a full-time technician, but you do need some technical assistance. The primary benefit, I think, in my mind, is security, oversight, and access. It means that I know who's connecting to our system, and I can control whether they're allowed and when they're allowed to connect to our system, which gives me more peace of mind because I'm very sort of paranoid, I suppose, when it comes to security, because it will be my fault if things go badly. I also like it because I can touch the data directly, and I can do wonderful things with it because I don't have to go through the user interface. We'll talk a little more about that later. I think that for most folks in the office, though, those are far distant concerns. The more interesting thing is that we enjoy far faster speed. We did actually start out with a cloud solution a few years back. We decided we would give it the good old college try. But what we found was that the users complained bitterly about the latency in the system. They were accustomed to things working more snappily. And so ultimately, we did move the thing on site, and it runs much faster, and the users and the secretarial staff in particular are far more comfortable as a result. But when you start to evaluate case management vendors, for me, I want to try and shortcut things as much as possible. If I can eliminate somebody early, it makes it easier. It saves time for me and them if we're not going to do business. And so honestly, the attitude that they come at me with has a lot to do with how I'm going to respond to them. Vendors really vary quite a bit here. What I'm looking for is a vendor that has a sort of an open, collaborative attitude, who's interested in learning about our organization and trying to discover whether their technical solution is suitable. What I don't want is a snake oil salesman who's going to come at me and explain to me why their product is the best thing in the world, and why obviously I want their product no matter what it is we do and how we do it. So that's not necessarily going to get you excluded entirely, but it's definitely going to make me try and see if I can talk to somebody else in the company. Do not succumb to the salesman. Closely related to that, I guess, is I want to try and figure out what kind of technical support I'm going to get really early in. How do they implement technical support? A lot of companies nowadays, as a cost-saving measure, have outsourced technical support to completely separate companies. Just in my view, that's totally unacceptable. I mean, the case management system is the beating heart in the middle of our organization, and it's certainly central to everything that I do. And the last thing I want is levels of indirection between me and the people who can actually solve my problems. Even if you do get to talk to people inside the company, though, what's the mechanism, right? Will they actually let you call them on the phone, or do they insist that you go through a chat or even an email mechanism? Do they give you 24/7 technical support, or is it just during business hours? A lot of folks maybe would be satisfied with business hours, but if we've got a big problem, I know I'm working late, and to be honest with you, I expect them to as well, as much money as you're going to wind up paying them, and as important it is to your organization. I mean, if case management is down, we're going to screech to a halt, and that's not acceptable. Security is something that I would encourage you to bring up with the vendor early, and this is an incredibly deep and complex subject. I mean, I have a great interest in security myself, and I try and learn about it as much as I can, and I still feel woefully ignorant. I know that you can't do a security audit of the vendor. That's not what I'm suggesting. But get them talking about security. Tell them a little bit about how you're worried about security, and ask them, how they feel about it. And just see how they respond. What do they have to say to you about that? Some companies will sort of wave their hands quite a bit, and say, oh, well, we hew to all industry standard security protocols. Well, okay, that sounds good. What are they, right? What specifically are you doing? You should be able to tell me that, right? The big thing, though, I want you to look out for is this. There are companies, I've talked to a couple of them, whose response is the specifics of our security are a secret. We can't tell you what we're doing because if people knew what we were doing, it would diminish the security. That's wrong. If they tell you that, then they are not doing security the right way, and you should not trust them. I also am going to try and drive the conversation towards the billing model and the cost as quick as I can. And the salesperson is going to fight you tooth and nail. They want you to want their product. They want you to make commitments to their product. They want you to have already made your mind up before they even talk about dollars and cents. But to my surprise, there are case management systems that are targeting indigent defenders that are breathtakingly expensive. And I have to think, who's buying these things? Who has the money for this? I see it, someone must be, right? But it's definitely not going to be us. We don't have that kind of budget. And if that's where they're at with it, let's figure that out early and save everybody some pain. Now, when I mention the billing model, there's different ways that people can charge you money for software, of course. Some vendors want to charge you per user, for example, or maybe they want to charge you per device. Maybe they want to charge you per user that's using it at the same time. They call that concurrent usage. Those to me are all a little bit problematic, and it's something you should think about carefully before you sign on to. For example, we have seasonal employees that come and go as the year progresses. I don't want to have to buy a software license for them, but I also can't have them not able to get in our case manager. I mean, they're part of the office. I also know that my users often have 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 different devices they're using to interact with our data systems. I'm sure not going to license that software for every one of those devices, but I don't want them to be unable to do their work in the device they want to use. Some case management vendors are now doing this by case. They charge you for each case that you open in the system. I think that's a really interesting model and appeals to me because it sort of scales with your workload rather than your number of devices. So investigate that stuff and see if it's even profitable for you to continue the conversation. I would also encourage you to talk early in about data migration. This is too often an afterthought, but presumably, I mean, virtually everyone has some kind of case management. You have some kind of existing data, and you should by all means preserve it. You should expect that that data moves with you into this new case management system. But that is not a trivial task. It can be quite a big chore, and it can cost a lot of money. And so if they're going to charge you an arm and a leg, you need to figure that out as quick as you can. It's amazing. I have talked to vendors who said, you know, the cost of migration is included in the product. We don't charge you a dime for that. On the other end of the scale, one vendor told me with a seemingly straight face, you know, we can't predict what it will cost. We will convert your data and you'll get a bill at the end. And I'm like, oh, what? I got a blank check? I mean, do you have any understanding of the work that we do? So speak with them frankly about the data migration issue because it can substantially change your implementation costs. Oh, and also too, I know that some organizations in the interest of saving money will say, you know, well, we just won't convert the data. We'll keep the old system for the legacy data, right? And then we'll put new data in the new system. Just in my opinion, that's a terrible idea. The last thing you want is to have a crusty old case management system that you got to try and figure out how to keep online, despite the fact that you're not getting updates to it. You know, that's going to be a pain. And realistically, your low-paid clerical folks are not going to go back and check the old system reliably. So it's not going to serve you like it should. Migrate your data, friends. Look carefully at the user interface of the software. Of course, it gives you a great deal of insight into the world of possibilities of the software as you look at the fields and the buttons and the screens that they've built for you. And that's important. But what you should also do is sort of blur your eyes and think about this a little bit differently. There's a concept of cognitive load, right? When you have like a really complex user interface, your brain is doing a fair amount of work just to figure out, you know, where the different bits are and which bits you should be interacting with and which ones are dangerous and you shouldn't touch. I can remember looking at one product that was really impressive. It had features that I have not seen in any other product, and I was quite taken with it. But it really was amazing how much they were jamming onto every individual screen. It was overwhelming, and I'm a nerd. And when I think about, my secretaries or some of the older attorneys in the office, they're not going to touch that with a 10-meter cattle prod, and you shouldn't ask them to. I mean, that's a big deal. Be careful, though, because some vendors go the opposite direction. They try and make things look so modern and attractive and sleek that there's very little on an individual screen. Think about doing a common task within the piece of software and think, how onerous is this? Does it take 6 clicks or 60 clicks, right? Because that makes a big difference in your day-to-day experience. And make sure that you've got folks like clerical support staff looking at it too, because they know better what they're doing day-to-day than you do. Look at the person model. How are they representing people inside the system? What I'm looking for is a rich person model, one that allows me to capture a substantial amount of detail about every person our office interacts with. Now, of course, we don't often have the type of complete and thorough information that we would love to have about the various players in the cases, but if we can get a hold of it, we certainly want a place to store it. Now, beware of being distracted by the low-hanging fruit. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that's super easy to do, and if you get distracted, ticking all those easy check boxes, you may not notice that there's other things that aren't represented well. So obviously you should be able to store the mailing address. Obviously it should hold the email address. You don't get points for that, right? But is it going to hold things like demographics about your clients? Even if you're not using those today, that's the kind of data that once you start collecting it, it can support legislative argument. It can help you with grant proposals. It can help you with internal management analysis. There's all kinds of things you can do if you are collecting information. Remember, though, it's not only about your client data, because there's other people who are very important to your cases, people like witnesses and victims. What are those people like inside the system? Do you have the ability to create a rich representation of them as well? And what happens when 10 years down the road, you find that you're appointed to represent a police officer who's testified on your past cases? Do you get to reuse that same person record, or do you have to make a new one because police officers are fundamentally different than clients in the system? I think that's a poor design, and it's one that I want to avoid. Conflicts of interest are, of course, a central issue in case management for indigent defense. And to my utter consternation, there are well-regarded products that do a poor job of checking for conflicts of interest. In fact, I looked at one a couple of years ago, and I am not kidding when I tell you I had to explain the concept of a conflict of interest to the vendor. That was how well they understood the work that we're doing. This is, I think, one of the biggest benefits that you can get from having a well-curated data store about your organization is the ability to, with a couple of clicks, do a thorough conflict check so that at the very beginning of your case, you know whether you're going to be able to represent this client all the way to the end. It's such a frustration to the entire office when you get something really significant like a murder case and you invest dozens or hundreds of hours only to discover one of those witnesses was a client way back when, and you got to hand it off to a private attorney. That's the worst. So look critically at how the conflict check system works. Reporting is, of course, going to be of central concern. You can expect that there will be a series of canned reports that come with every product. Those may or may not be beneficial to you. What you should think more about is what is the difficulty and what is the expense of making custom reports, reports that serve the workflows and habits that your office is already used to. In all likelihood, those reports are going to have to be built by the vendor. It's rare that a product gives you the power to build your own. So talk to them about that. What does it cost to make a report? How quick can you expect it to be delivered? Do you have any assurances of that? And certainly inquire about ad hoc reporting. For me, it is a not uncommon situation that I come into work and find out that there is a particular set of data that's needed. Maybe not today, but before tomorrow anyway. And we've never asked for it before, and we'll probably never want it again. So without ad hoc reporting capability, how are you going to get that information? It's important that there's some mechanism for you to get it. Time tracking is, of course, not yet the norm in public defense, but it seems like that there is a growing consensus that it is part of best practice. Certainly there are a growing number of offices that are tracking their time. Our office is one of those, and so time tracking is certainly of great concern and interest to me. Aside from the obvious stuff, something I want you to think about is how onerous is the act of time tracking in this case management system? Have they really put thought and effort into making it as low friction as possible, or is it going to impose a substantial new type of work on your employees? If it's the latter, you can expect some really bitter pushback if you do put time tracking. But if it's the former, maybe not. Document automation is, I guess it's not even really an exotic feature anymore. What I'm talking about here is your case management system knows all this different stuff about your case, about your client. And so if you have something like a boilerplate form letter that you want to be sent out as a matter of course every time a case gets reset, there's no reason why a secretary has to be all that involved in that. There ought to be a button for you to push that spits that letter out. That's entirely possible. I would discourage you to be impressed by a document automation system that is locked into a particular word processor. So for example, there are systems that work intimately with Microsoft Word, but if you're not a Word user, then the document automation quits working. I do not think that one product should be entirely reliant upon the other. The better thing is to have a flexible system. Now, document automation can take another form too. Some systems offer you rules-based automatic document automation. So like the system would detect that a certain circumstance has occurred and it will generate, maybe form letters, it generates maybe motions practice, these kinds of things. My experience has been that people are initially enthusiastic about that, but the criminal justice system seems to be built of an infinitely deep series of exceptions to every rule. And no sooner do we build something like that than we discover why it doesn't work some appreciable percentage of the time. So I'm not as stoked about that as I could be. Document management is another feature that is frequently touted as being, modern and whiz-bang, and if you're not buying our system that does this, then your system is lame. I have mixed feelings about document management. I think that it's certainly the best when it is managing literal documents. So if you have, something like a PDF that is a set of medical records, it will allow you to upload that PDF into the case management system and have it be effectively a part of the case's representation. That's nice because you don't have to go outside the case management system to find that PDF. You don't have to move to a file manager or something. So there's some mild convenience to be had there. But what I find is that our staff is at least as interested, if not more so, in uploading evidence than they are the documents that we generate. And evidence doesn't really work in document management systems as well as you want it to. What we tend to get is, for example, a set of crime scene photographs or maybe a video that plays only in some quirky, weird player that Walmart uses. Those kinds of things are crummy in document management systems. So it's nice to have, but it's not going to make my mind up one way or the other. You're already managing your documents. Workflow automation is, I think, something that is often undervalued. If you think about any mechanistic process in your office, particularly those that your clerical staff are doing, that is an opportunity for workflow automation. It's probably best described through an example, I suppose. In our jurisdiction, maybe in some of yours too, all of our cases start out in a lower court, and then they may be bound over to the grand jury. They may come out of the grand jury and then into a higher court, the criminal court. And by statute, those two cases, or I guess those two halves of one set of charges, if you want to look at it that way, are independent cases. So we've got two cases in our system in that situation. So a regular chore that our secretaries have to perform is when the case comes out of the grand jury, then they need to create that upper case, the criminal case. And that involved a lot of rekeying of data. We were able to describe all the steps involved in building the higher court case So the vendor could make a button that makes that super easy to do. So that saves them a tremendous amount of time. Not only does your office benefit because your secretaries are working more efficiently, it also makes it easier for you to gain acceptance for a new case management system. There's always going to be a lot of resistance when you switch something so fundamental to your office's operation. If you can show your staff that it's going to save them time, that's going to make their lives easier, then it certainly is going to make the sales job easier for you. Remote access is something I think is pretty important. If you wind up using a cloud-based system, then effectively you're always doing remote access because you're never in the same building as your data. But if you're locally hosting your data, remote access is something you'll have to put some thought into. How is it possible for your users to get at the information when they're out in the field? It's not a particularly difficult thing. It's just something to discuss with the vendor and make sure that it's not going to incur any expense that you haven't anticipated. And two, so that you can consider the security implications, because certainly there are some when you're doing remote access. Platform agnosticism is something that I am a huge fan of, and I would like to push you in that direction if I can. And what I mean here is, there was a time when I started, there was just no question. Everything was Windows all the time. And so all the case management software was written for Microsoft Windows, and there was really no conversation to be had. But nowadays, there's a lot more interest in using other operating systems, both because there are Mac offices and Mac users, and because the mobile devices have gotten such traction. So when you're thinking about tablets or even smartphones, that means Android or iOS for the most part. Within our organization, we have embraced the bring your own device trend to a certain extent. We have, particularly with the students who come in and do volunteer work with us, they may have a personal laptop that they greatly prefer to the hardware that I would supply them. I understand that, and I'm happy to support them as best I can. So we want to make sure that we can support every operating system insofar as possible. Now, if you're using a web-based case management system, which a lot of them are these days, in other words, it's actually running like a website inside of your web browser, then platform agnosticism is in theory already accomplished because there are web browsers on pretty much every kind of device. But be careful though, there are still some aggressive vendors who are specifically building systems that run in Internet Explorer only. It may be that you could load it in something like Safari or Chrome or Firefox, but they don't guarantee it's going to work. So what you want to know is, what are the supported browsers? In other words, what are they promising it's going to work in? It needs to be everything you anticipate using. Auditing is probably the sort of thing that most people don't think about until they actually need it. It's not sexy and it's not interesting, but this is where you're creating a trail inside the system that is attributing actions to individual users. I think for us where it comes up is when we find that there's been an egregious mistake made inside the case management system, something that causes us some sort of real trouble. We want to figure out who did that so that we can, re-educate them and beat them severely. Without an audit trail, you have no way of attributing that action to any individual person, and then everyone gets beaten, and they don't like that. Most systems have lightweight auditing in the user interface, but it's very likely that within the database, there is much more auditing data available. That's the way it is with our system anyway. So since I can dip down in the database and see who did each thing and when, I'm able to answer those kinds of questions, and it has helped us quite a bit on occasion. Customization is something that, in my view, is essential. There are certainly case management systems that are not customizable. Those systems, basically it's a take it or leave it type situation. They've already decided how the office runs. They have a mental model of how defense work goes, and you are sort of stuck with it. If you have a rigid and inflexible product, it's you who has to do the accommodation. You'll have to change your workflows or bend over backwards to use their user interface in the way they envisioned. I think that is totally unacceptable. The job is miserable enough as it is. There's no reason why you should have to be accommodating a stupid computer. What I want is a system that's going to be able to be customized in such a way that it works like our office works. And there certainly are systems along those lines. The degree of customizability is going to vary. You shouldn't expect to be able to totally reinvent the product, but look for the ability to incarnate those processes and policies and procedures that your office is familiar with within the product. Integration is related, but not the same. By this, I'm talking about, can the case management system work and play well with other pieces of software that your organization is using? This too, I think, is pretty important. Back in the day, every piece of software was an island, and it was understood that whatever the software did, well, that's what you get. It doesn't really do anything more than that. But truly, those days are behind us. A lot of software nowadays integrates with other stuff, and I think it's not too much to ask. Instead, I think you should be looking into the details of how integration works. So just as an example, any case management system worth its salt is going to provide some sort of calendar management system, because calendaring is intimately related to your case data. But you probably don't want to use the calendar that's built into the case management system, at least not exclusively. I mean, folks are very used to keeping track of their agenda on their smartphone, on their tablet, or maybe just, on their desktop or laptop using a piece of software that they prefer. So if you find that the software integrates with Exchange or with Outlook, that will satisfy some people. But what happens if you don't like Outlook and Exchange? Or what if you do like it, but your umbrella agency decides that they're not going to provide it to you anymore, that you're switching over to some other type of calendar system? Well, then you're going to be boned. So what I'm looking for instead is standards compliance. There are industry standard ways to communicate in both directions different kinds of standard information. And so, for example, when you're talking about calendaring, the CalDAV standard is well established, and it's supported by many, many products. So if your case management system talks CalDAV, that means that you can connect it to all kinds of other software systems that they've maybe never even heard of. Doesn't matter. So ask for standards compliant integration. That's what you're looking for, and that's what you should be sold on. You should also ask them about their technology stack. Now, this is a little bit of nerd jargon, and I'm sorry, but that's the right term to use, technology stack. Every piece of software is built out of other pieces of software, mostly stuff that you as an end user is not going to ever touch or see. The easiest example of this is the database itself. Whatever your case management system is, it's not the database, it's talking to the database, and it's the database that your information actually resides in. So an example then is what database system have they chosen to build their case management system on top of? Now, nerds like me have passionate feelings about what is the right and wrong answer here. But what you're really looking for as a reasonable person is just, is this a database that is contemporary? Is it something that has a company that still exists that backs it up, right? Microsoft SQL Server is certainly the de facto answer. Most case management systems I'm aware of are backed on Microsoft SQL right now. I don't love that, but I mean, it's not wrong. It certainly works. But there are still systems being sold that are backed on weird and archaic databases, and you do not want to buy into that. Those are systems who already have a freshness date that's getting ready to expire if it hasn't. And you don't want to be stuck with that thing. So ask what they're built out of. You also should consider whether you are to be accorded access to the data itself. In other words, through the case management software, you have mediated access. They've created, forms and screens that let you see and interact with different facets of the information. But what if you need to break out of that? What if you need to do something different? Now, I get that you may not have technical folks on your staff, and that's fine. But you could always bring in a consultant. You can hire somebody for an individual task. It may be that your umbrella agency has some technical staff that you could leverage. There's all sorts of ways that you could do this. but it's all going to be predicated on the idea that you have been allowed to touch the raw data. Now, why would you want to do that? We do it for a lot of reasons. One reason is for ad hoc reporting. I alluded to that earlier. When I get that crazy question this morning that's super important, I can answer it because I can touch the data itself. I can get in there and make queries that were never envisioned before. I can also build my own reporting systems, and there are certain types of reports that we have become pretty reliant on that are just weird and in some cases kind of intense, but we have them built to talk directly to the data system. It also allows us to create our own integrations. And so, for example, our case management system sadly does not support CalDAV. It does not natively talk to a calendar of your choice. But I was able to write my own CalDAV adapter because I can talk to the database. And so as a result, our attorneys can see, their court calendars on their iPads and smartphones and such like. It also makes it easier to engage in things like research if you partner up with another organization, if you've been accorded data access. Now, if you've chosen to locally host your case management system, you kind of have raw data access implicitly. There's not a lot that the vendor can do to keep you out. Now, they may ask you to stay out or maybe even look for you to promise to stay out, but they can't really make you. But if you're using a cloud solution, if it's hosted somewhere else, that's where this question becomes really key. Because by default, you'll not have that access. You'll not have that ability. And I suppose I'm spoiled, but I feel like that it's really, if not essential, it's a really, really big deal. And I would also encourage you, and this is a hard sell, doggone it, but I mean this sincerely. When you talk to the vendor, you should ask them for their entity relational diagram. This is the nerdiest thing I'll say. The entity relational diagram is kind of like a family tree. It sort of has that look to it. Rather than describing relationships within a family, it's describing relationships within the database itself. A database system, such as Microsoft SQL Server, by default it's like an infinitely long row of filing cabinets full of blank paper. You can organize your information in it any way you can imagine. So one of the things that the case management vendor has done in developing their product is to come up with an organizational scheme, some way that your information goes into the database engine. And the entity relational diagram is the industry standard way to document that organization. So why should you ask for it? There are 3 reasons why I think you should ask for it. Number one, because if you have direct access to the data, this is your map. This is how you can find your way around the database and get information and manipulate information within that system. Now, you can do it without the entity relational diagram. Frankly, it's not too difficult to reverse engineer a database, but it's a waste of time, frankly. They should already have this documentation, so get it. Second of all, if you do wind up retaining a vendor, or if you have staff of your own, and you want them to develop some new feature or integration, maybe it's an automated data import from a larger municipality, or maybe it's something to support your research, or maybe you're building a calendar adapter like I did. Whatever you're doing, if you have that diagram and you can give it to your software developer or to your nerds, it makes their process a lot easier. But the biggest reason why I think you should ask for it, even if you don't ever think that you'll have data access or want it, is it tells you a lot about the vendor, how they respond. Some vendors, maybe most vendors, are going to tell you to get bent. They're going to say the entity relational diagram is part of our intellectual property, and it's not something that we share. And I think that is baloney of the most odious type. I have built, reverse engineered, interoperated with, maintained, and worked with databases for decades, and I can tell you they all look really, really similar. This is literally a storage mechanism that we have been using since the 1950s, and there is nobody who's doing stuff in databases that is in some way so clever, so cunning, that it would hurt their business in some way if other people knew how they were doing it. That is just not a thing. And if they tell you that it is, they're lying to you for some reason. Maybe their database is hideous inside and they're ashamed of it. Maybe they are young and green developers full of themselves and they think they're that brilliant. I can't say why, but I can tell you that no is the wrong answer and you shouldn't accept it. That is my opinion. You should also speak to people who are already using software systems that you're considering. Now, obviously, this is going to be real time consuming. So this is like after you've evaluated a bunch of vendors and you're getting it down to a relatively small number. I think it's important to talk to people who are already using the product. In all likelihood, the vendor can give you contact information for a few of their users, and I think you should throw it away. What you should do instead is find other people who are using their software and talk to them, because they've probably cherry-picked the people who they feel like are the very most satisfied with their product. And they're going to make it easy for you to find things to like about their product. They've got a sales team. What you need to do is figure out what's wrong with their product. And please don't misunderstand me. There's something wrong with every single product. In fact, there's lots of things wrong. Nerds like me often say that we're looking for the software that sucks less, because all software sucks. So figure out what's wrong with each product that you're thinking about, and then see which one has the least not going for it. That's how you choose these things. That has actually reached the end of my prepared remarks. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to engage in conversation, or we can all go to lunch. It's entirely up to you.
Thank you, Isaac. I was riveted. This is Andy. I set this so that everybody would be muted as they came in. So you'll see next to your name a little microphone, and it's in red, and it's checked off. What I'm going to do now is unmute everybody. There are 20 people here. If it becomes cacophonous, I will try and identify the culprit and mute you again. But once I unmute you, that will mean that however you've connected through your computer microphone or on the phone, you'll be able to actually speak and ask Isaac questions. So here we go. Also, it is typical at this moment to have a long silence, but please jump in.
All right, this is Eric in Louisiana. I don't have a question, but I want to underscore a couple of points that I very strongly agree with. Can y'all hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Eric.
Okay. I just think about customization. I cannot emphasize strongly enough, because the things that we collected data on and knew we were going to need data on, how long has it been, 8 years? There's things we would need to collect data on, such as whether or not, just for example, the client is a veteran. That makes a gigantic difference today. A huge, valuable, single checkbox can change the entire course of the defense to the better. And so you want to make sure your vendor is open to adding new fields. And again, as screen bloat issue, you have to figure out a way to make it as unobtrusive as possible, because your screen's probably already pretty full. But it's really, really important that you're able to make requests that are handled in a timely fashion for new fields to be added. Laws are changing all the time. Programs are evolving or opening up funding opportunities that you need to collect data on. So it's really, really important. Our vendor has been really, really receptive to these small little tweaks, and also gigantic tweaks. Like we recognized very early on as a state regulatory authority, we had to track the finances, and we designed a data input system or technique, I guess, for collecting office revenues and expenditures and also personnel compensation. These kind of things you may find you're going to need to track. And you have to make sure that the customization is really, that they're, enthusiastic about it, not just begrudgingly willing.
Isaac, this is Dean Beer from Montgomery County. When we were going through this, I'm a county public defender's office, and so we had to get permission, for everything we do. And our county decided not to go with an off-the-shelf model, but to custom build it because of all these issues I think you've talked about. And one thing that our county found on some prior programs, they were held hostage by the vendor when they tried to get the data out, and it became vastly expensive. So when I first started this, I wanted to go with an off-the-shelf brand because it was quicker, and we needed a database system. But now, almost a year into it, we've developed a really quality database. It may have been more expensive up front, but the county believes it's going to be better in the back end. And so most of the things that you have addressed, I think we've covered in ours. I was kind of happy listening to your seminar. But so I don't know if other people think about a customized system, their own, have an outside vendor come in to build it. It's worked for us so far.
That's great to hear. That is certainly a Herculean undertaking, but I certainly understand the appeal of it. My dreamy dream, something that I hope to find collaborators and funders for at some point, is to put together an open source case management system that we can all use together, something that would be unencumbered by licensing and owned by no one but everyone, so that public defenders can quit putting coins in that slot. Unfortunately, there's a substantial amount of money needed at the very beginning part of that project, and it hasn't gelled yet, but I think that would be dynamite.
That'd be great. Thank you for this. This was very informative. Thank you.
So this is Andy. I got a couple of questions by the chat box, which I'd like to pass on to you, Sarah. I'll just on to you, Isaac. I will tell you both of them, and you can handle them how you wish. Sarah Wilson asked what case management system you are using in Knox County. And Rebecca Ackerman asked, right at the beginning of your presentation when you were talking about clouds, she asked, I guess this is addressed to the group, has anyone dealt with any of the government clouds, like GovClouds or AWS for government?
Well, as to the second, I would be a no. I don't know, maybe someone else can chime in for that. I am familiar with AWS's general commercial offering, and I do run a couple of small clouds myself for various projects, but not in the GovCloud, no. I feel maybe weirdly skittish about divulging specifically what we use, but I guess it's inescapable. We use the Defender Data solution from JusticeWorks here at the CLO.
Hey, this is Rebecca from New York County Defender Services. Can folks hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So I actually, we're currently going through this process right now, so it was amazing to hear all these things. There's stuff in here I had not been very good about requesting from potential vendors. I did want to just note a few things that are, or like highlight a few things that I found really important to think about. So one is the difference between configurability and customization, meaning configurability, things you can do internally, or things you can do in your office in the case management system that makes it like configured to your office, and then customization, meaning things that the vendor has to build specifically for your office, and just getting a pricing on customization, and also figuring out what is the time frame for that. Like, we've talked to some offices where they have like a developer who does it, so you're in line with like, you know, however many other sites need customization. And then So I actually, one thing your point about raw data access brought up some old memories of mine. I used to work for a vendor, and our programmers hated when we gave people entity relationship maps because they needed to be able to change those, and once people started reporting on individual fields in the database, it became like a 6-month-long ordeal to like change anything. And so I think you may get some pushback, especially from vendors who do things in more like iterative programming. They may have more issues than a vendor who does things in a more waterfall or like set up front sort of way. That's it for me.
I think that's a really fair and good point to make. I mean, there certainly is a perspective there from the vendor that's very legitimate why they would prefer to keep control of that. I do understand that, and I guess I was a little bit flip about that. From my perspective, if you think about a case where you've got like a murder case where you've got a dozen, maybe 2 dozen banker's boxes full of documentation and evidence, right? We've got administrative assistants whose job it is to organize case files like that and make sure that all the material gets where it needs to be and that everyone can find it and that the organization is sort of normalized so we can become accustomed to it. So if you imagine for a moment that you've retained somebody for that position, somebody whose job it is to specifically store and retrieve bits of your case, and imagine that that person says, of course I will do that for you. And I will be Johnny on the spot, and whenever you need to see that medical release of the autopsy report, I'll bring it right to you. And you say, that's amazing. Here's my file room, so go ahead and organize that. Great. So how are you going to organize that, by the way? Oh, I'm not going to tell you that. That's proprietary, right? If they told you that you're not allowed to know how they're organizing your most critical data, I think that person would not work for our office for like 3 minutes. And to me, that's a very similar situation. The idea that it's permissible that our organization should allow the data to be stored in a way that we're not permitted to understand. I just can't get with it. Just my opinion.
This is Eric in Louisiana. My bigger issue, I guess, because I'm not that deep into the actual manipulation of the database tables, is if you can extract the data in an ad hoc fashion, as Isaac also, I strongly support what you said about that. We have questions all the time that come up, and if we were restricted to only those reports that the vendor dreamed up, or even if we had it purchased, there's new stuff all the time. Every legislative session, we get some weird-ass bill that we have to put a price tag on, and we have a 48-hour turnaround time by law. So if we can't just get right into the data ourselves and, pull it out into Access and then manipulate it there or in Excel, our database would be, I would say worthless, but terribly superficial. And so I want to underscore Isaac's point about raw data access. It is super important. Again, I'm not so concerned about the proprietary nature of the table structures, but it does open up an issue as regards public records requests, because our vendor, his argument is you can't request these data because I'm not showing you my proprietary table structure, which is great for me because I don't think a lawyer's case file should be a public record, but it seems to be up for debate. Does anybody have any experience with that issue?
So this is Andy. I'll let people respond to Eric's question, but I just wanted to note that I'm getting a couple of others to me in the chat box. Some people I see are successfully sending their questions to everybody, but I know I'm getting some just privately, and I want to make sure that they're aired. Stephen Goldmeyer first wrote, when we try to coordinate with other offices, sometimes case management system designers are in the room to propose technical solutions for people using their systems. And then he says, any tips for navigating spaces where case management monopolies are starting to emerge? Then Katrine Johnson from Washington State wrote, I believe from Washington State, Isaac, are your case management systems used only by agency staff attorneys, or are they also used by assigned counsel and contract attorneys? And do you have any specific tips on interacting with the latter group? I know also that Stephen may have something. And then one last question. Sarah Wilson wanted to know if anybody was using the system Legal Server in a public defender office here.
I think I can only answer the middle question, which is no. The system that I administrate is only for the public defender office here in Knox County. If something goes out to assigned counsel, they will use whatever they use. They don't use the same system that we use. I know that there are folks who have experience in that sort of thing, but not I.
So I can talk to the question about like monopoly and people in the room. So we've been really careful at NYCDS to make sure that the discussions we're having about what we need from the system are happening before we even start talking to any potential vendors. So really going through what is the real life journey of a case and what are the pieces of information that any given case needs. I think that gives you a lot better inoculation against vendor, what I've heard of as vendor Stockholm syndrome. I also do think it can be very problematic when there are salespeople in the room while public defenders are trying to do their work or are trying to coordinate. So that has been a real concern for our office.
I think that's a really awesome idea, putting together, the requirements before you speak to vendors. It's a salesman's job to convince you that whatever you thought you wanted, was just sort of a first impression. What you really want is what they happen to have to sell today, and some of them are awfully good at it. And so I think that's a dynamite idea. What I usually do is actually create a spreadsheet where I have, the vendors sort of going across the columns, and then vertically I'll run down, just all the different things that I'm thinking about, issues. I want to make sure it does this. I want to make sure it has this capability that will allow me to do this. And I fill those cells in for all the vendors to make sure I'm asking the same questions of everyone and to make it easier for me to compare apples to apples once we start looking at the different vendors, so I don't get too swayed by, any one sales guy's capabilities.
Yeah, I'd love to talk just for a second about the thing that you're talking about is the primary thing that is my job where I am right now and with my last system too. And it's, you'll hear it called systems analysis, you'll hear it called a lot of different things. So I just want to basically put in a plug for systems analysis and say that it's a framework for exactly the questions that everybody's asking here. Isaac, you said this, I thought totally, a thing that might unlock the puzzle for a lot of people. I want the case management system to work the way the office works, which means that you have to have a really clear understanding of how the office works. And that's easier to do when, you're like a representational county public defender with 5 attorneys who cover arraignment shifts twice a week or whatever, right? Versus if you're a 200-person organization that does 5 different types of law, the systems analysis requirements and the documentation of process becomes so much more important because then you need that framework to be able to even, asking, can this do document management? You also need to be able to ask, right, a lot of questions about all of the different processes used with documents. And if you haven't taken the time to understand those those conversations can be very, very challenging. So mostly just a plug for systems analysis thinking, and people should get in touch with me if they want to hear more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right on, and I'm glad you reminded me. Something I think I meant to say and maybe failed to is I have certainly experienced the situation where organizations have decided that they have, like 1 or 2 or 3 folks, often the attorneys that are most senior and that they judge to be most technically adept, who are going to decide what software the office is going to implement. I think it's a very poor approach. I think it's really critical to make sure you've got representatives of every different type of work inside your organization involved in the process, at least to some extent. You want to make sure that if you've got investigators, that you're talking to the investigators about how they use case management and why they don't use it more. Talk to the clerical staff. Having done this as long as I have, I still every day am learning more about how each of those different departments does their job. I mean, everybody's job is totally complex. So I think that's really vital to make sure that you're servicing every aspect of your organization because you're reliant upon every aspect of your organization.
Right.
Yeah. Isaac, I agree. When we built our system, we spent maybe 2 days in a room with 10 people from all different aspects of our office going through it, and we'd use one of those mapping with the I don't know what they're called, but they have the diamonds and boxes, and we'd map the whole thing out and where we needed to track data and who needed to be involved in that. It was a time-consuming process, but it worked, and even people who thought they knew what they were doing would say, "Oh, I didn't know you were doing that," or "I didn't know how that interacted." And it was fascinating time, but it was 2 days of solid work.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think that's exactly the right way to do it. And not only do you learn that about other departments, so to speak, but you also, I think, can often expose opportunities to increase efficiencies because one department doesn't necessarily know what the other one is doing or can do or has on hand.
Yeah.
So it can generally benefit your office, honestly.
Correct. Yep, it did. In other ways, too, yeah.
And I will say the process we used in Ohio at the State Public Defender's Office developing our case management system was we had what I call the OPD Online Think Tank, which was representatives from every single department from other branch offices, not local offices, that would be using the service. And they were part of the team from scoping to post-deployment questions. We met weekly. And so, it's, I agree that it can take a lot of time to do this, but the thing that was so valuable was each week I would come back and say, okay, we had to solve this question of what should this drop-down look like, and we chose this. Does anybody hate this, right? How does this feel? And the group would often say, we all hate this, please do it differently. And we ended up with a much, much better product because we were doing systems analysis literally throughout the whole process, not just in the gathering requirements phase, which is maybe the traditional model of doing scoping. We were doing this analysis throughout the whole process. So again, a big plug for doing it that way and thinking creatively on how to incorporate constant systems analysis into this. All the stuff that Isaac is saying is just enhanced by doing that kind of work as you're working on this.
Okay, I know we're right up on the hour, and I imagine people have to go to other things. There are just a couple of fairly specific questions that came in. Sarah Wilson is interested in if anybody is using Twilio as an add-on to text message clients. Brenda, no last name, is asking a related question. Can you use Defender data to notify clients with text or robocalls? And Brenda also asks, is there a file size limitation with Defender data? I don't know if anybody knows the answer to those, but they're out there.
I can tell you that currently the Defender Data product does not incorporate SMS messaging or phone robo-dialing, but it is my understanding they do intend to build in SMS messaging probably at some point this year. I don't know if they have any kind of timetable for that. I actually have written my own system for doing that hopefully I'm going to be bringing online using Twilio actually in the not terribly distant future, I think. But I'm not doing it yet. File size limitation, as I recall, is configurable per agency. I think you get to decide what the largest reasonable file is to upload for your agency. I think that's how that works.
This is Eric in Louisiana. We have Defender data also, and we are in the process of deploying a pilot text messaging in the city of New Orleans because we got the mayor to foot the telecommunication bill. So it probably, assuming it works well, they probably are going to open that up after they're sure it works with us, after we take all the black eyes. But we're a statewide, and they have given us some limits. I don't know exactly what the gigabyte limit is, but they're asking us to store photos and videos on local servers because people were just filling up their server with, 7-Eleven videos of robberies. And so you probably have to negotiate with them. I'm guessing they treat everybody a little differently depending on, I guess, the size of the system, I guess, because they kicked us out for a video.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. If you're paying the sticker price, then I would question your negotiating skills. I think that they have a lot of room to move. Any vendor of case management has a lot of room to move on the price. And I'm certainly going to be looking for them to make us some kind of deal rather than pay whatever it says on the sticker.
Okay, well, this has been a terrific conversation, and we can continue. I also want to be respectful of people's time, and I also want to try and bring it to a clear conclusion, if that's what it needs to be brought to. I have no further questions that have come to me in chat, but as I say, for me, this was really extremely useful, extremely informative, and I'm very thankful to you, Isaac, for taking the time to put this PowerPoint together and just the thought required to march through all of these ideas. If anybody does have a parting shot, then please feel free. We are doing a recording today, and a couple of people had requested, we don't post these online, but it is possible to send you a link if you want to view it again later. So do get in touch if that's of interest. And apart from that, thank you all, and thank you again, Isaac.
I appreciate everybody lending me your ears, and if I can be of any assistance to anyone, or if you have any further questions to come up with later, you're welcome to contact me via email or hit me up on LinkedIn, whatever you want to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Isaac.
Thank you, Isaac.
Thanks, Isaac.